The wagon wheel caught another rut, jolting Clarabelle Finch so hard her teeth clacked together. She pressed a hand to her ribs, feeling the reassuring weight of the pistol hidden beneath layers of patched fabric. Kansas lay 300 miles behind her now, along with a dead husband's grave and accusations that would see her hanged if she ever returned. The town of Dead River appeared through a haze of dust and dying sunlight. It squatted against the horizon like a collection of broken teeth-weathered buildings leaning into each other for support, their paint peeled away by wind and neglect. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, reluctant streams, even from a distance. Clarabelle could smell the peculiar mix of horse dung, wood smoke, and human desperation that marked every frontier town she'd passed through. She'd sold everything except what fit in the wagon bed: 2 dresses, a sewing kit, her late husband's medical books, and the pistol. The rest had gone to buy passage this far west, where her name might not follow, where Martha Henderson's poisonous testimony about stolen horses couldn't reach, where being a widow at 27 didn't automatically make her either a target or a suspect. The main street was nearly empty when she rolled in. A few men lounged outside the saloon, their eyes tracking her progress with the lazy interest of predators too well fed to hunt. She kept her gaze forward, back straight despite the exhaustion that made her bones feel like they'd been boiled soft. The boarding house sat at the far end of the street, a 2-story building that might have been white once but had faded to the color of old bones. Mrs. Harriet Pike answered the door on the 3rd knock. She was a narrow woman with a face like dried apple, and eyes that took inventory of Clarabelle from bonnet to boots. "We're full up," she said, though Clarabelle could see empty windows on the 2nd floor, curtains drawn against nothing. "I can pay," Clarabelle said, reaching for her purse. 2 weeks in advance." "Mrs." Pike's mouth tightened. "I said we're full. Try the hotel." "The hotel's closed. I saw the boards on the windows." "Then try the next town." The door began to close. Clarabelle wedged her boot against the frame. "Please, I've come a long way. I just need—" "I know what you need, Mrs." Pike's voice dropped low, venomous. "Same thing all women running west need, a place to hide their shame. Well, we don't harbor fugitives here. The sheriff already told me about you. Clarabelle Finch, widow of that doctor who got mixed up with horse thieves. You think changing territories changes what you are." The words hit like stones. Clarabelle's hand trembled as she withdrew her foot. "Those accusations were false. I was cleared." "Cleared don't mean innocent, Mrs." Pike leaned forward. "My husband's on the town council. One word from me and you'll be run out before dawn. Best save yourself the trouble." The door slammed. Clarabelle stood there, staring at the peeling paint, feeling the weight of 300 miles in her legs and the futility of running in her chest. Behind her, she heard boots on wood, the slow approach of the men from the saloon. She turned, hand drifting toward her hidden pistol. But the footsteps stopped. A horse's whinny cut through the evening air, not the broken sound of the tired nags at the hitching posts, but something proud and dark. Clarabelle looked up to see a rider coming down the main street. He sat his black horse like he'd been born to it, but it was his clothes that made her stare, all black, from the hat pulled low to the coat that brushed his stirrups. A bandana covered the lower half of his face, leaving only visible eyes the color of winter sky just before a storm. The men from the saloon melted back into the shadows. Even Mrs. Pike's curtain twitched aside. The rider stopped his horse directly between Clarabelle and the boarding house, studying her with those pale eyes. "Mrs. Pike giving you trouble?" His voice came muffled through the bandana, but she caught the hint of something that might have been amusement. "No trouble I can't handle," Clarabelle said, lifting her chin. She'd learned never to show weakness to strange men, especially not men who made whole towns hold their breath. "That's so." He swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, spurs ringing against the packed earth. "Then I suppose you've got somewhere else to stay tonight, somewhere that ain't your wagon." She said nothing, which was answer enough. He knocked on the boarding house door, 3 solid raps that seemed to echo down the empty street. Mrs. Pike opened immediately, as if she'd been standing just inside. "Evening, Harriet," the man said, pleasant as discussing weather. "I hear you've got a room available." I told her we're full. No, just that one word, soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "You're not." "Mrs.?" Pike's face went the color of fresh lard. Sir, I don't think." "Good, don't think." He reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch that clinked. 2 weeks. You said—" He glanced back at Clarabelle. "Make it a month. The lady's had a long journey." He pressed the pouch into Mrs. Pike's trembling hand. The woman looked like she wanted to argue, looked like she wanted to slam the door again. But something in those winter eyes stopped her. She nodded once, jerky as a marionette. "Room 6, she whispered. "Top of the stairs, end of the hall." "Much obliged." He touched his hat brim, a gesture that might have been mockery. Then he turned to Clarabelle. "Don't let her charge you twice. That'd be poor hospitality." He was back on his horse before she could form a response. But as he gathered the reins, he leaned down slightly. "If you're staying in this town," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear, "sleep with one eye open. Dead River's got a way of living up to its name." "Why help me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know Harriet Pike, and I know what it's like to need a door that'll open." He straightened. "Don't ask who I am. Just know I ain't the one you need to fear." Then he was gone, horse and rider disappearing into the gathering darkness like smoke into sky. Clarabelle stood there a moment longer, feeling the weight of curious eyes from every window on the street. Finally, she turned back to Mrs. Pike, who clutched the doorframe like it might save her from drowning. "Room 6, Clarabelle said calmly. "I'll need help with my trunk." She retrieved her belongings from the wagon, ignoring Mrs. Pike's sour silence and the way the woman flinched every time a board creaked. The room was small but clean, a narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand, a chair that looked like it might survive one more sitting. The window faced west, where the last of the sunlight was dying behind the mountains. Clarabelle set her pistol on the nightstand, within easy reach. Then she sat on the bed's edge and finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion, the fear, the tiny spark of something that might have been hope. A stranger in black had bought her a month's reprieve. She didn't know why, didn't know what price might come attached to such kindness. But for tonight, she had a roof and a bed and a door she could lock, in a frontier where those things could mean the difference between living and dying. It was enough. She lay back on the thin mattress, still wearing her travel clothes, and listened to the sounds of Dead River settling into night-distant piano music from the saloon. A dog barking, the wind asking questions through gaps in the walls. Somewhere out there, a man who wouldn't give his name was riding through darkness. Clarabelle found herself wondering if he always traveled at night, if the bandana ever came off, if those winter eyes ever warmed. She pushed the thoughts away. She'd learned the hard way that wondering about men led nowhere good. But as sleep finally claimed her, she couldn't forget his words, "I ain't the one you need to fear." In a town that had already shown its teeth, she suspected that was less comfort than warning. Tomorrow, she'd find out what or who she did need to fear in Dead River. Tonight, though, she would sleep with one eye open, just as he'd said, just as she'd been doing for 300 miles, just as she might have to do for the rest of her life. However long or short that proved to be in this place where the river ran dry, and strangers in black paid for rooms they'd never sleep in. The morning came too soon, bringing with it the sounds of a town reluctantly waking. Clarabelle had slept fitfully, jerking awake at every creak of the boarding house's old bones. Her pistol lay where she'd placed it, untouched but ready. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mrs. Pike moving about downstairs, the aggressive clatter of pots speaking louder than words about the woman's feelings. Clarabelle washed her face in the basin's cold water and changed into her second dress, a brown wool that had seen better days but was clean and mended. She pinned her dark hair carefully, studying her reflection in the spotted mirror. 27 years had left their marks, fine lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting against prairie sun, a thinness to her cheeks that came from too many meals missed. But her green eyes were still clear, still defiant. She'd need that defiance in the days ahead. The dining room was empty, save for an old man hunched over coffee and yesterday's newspaper. He glanced up when she entered, then quickly away, as if her presence might be contagious. Mrs. Pike emerged from the kitchen with a plate of biscuits and gravy that she set down hard enough to slosh. "Breakfast comes with the room," she said curtly. "Though I don't suppose he told you that." Clarabelle kept her voice neutral as she sat. "Don't play dumb. The man who paid your way." "Mrs." Pike's mouth twisted. "You're not the first woman he's taken pity on. Won't be the last, neither." Clarabelle broke a biscuit carefully, though her appetite had fled. "Kind of him, then, to help women in need." "Kind, Mrs." Pike snorted. "That what you call it, man like that don't do nothing out of kindness. Everything's got a price. You'll learn that soon enough." The old man rustled his newspaper loudly, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Mrs." Pike retreated to the kitchen, leaving Clarabelle to choke down what she could of the meal. The gravy was lumpy, the biscuits hard as stones, but she'd eaten worse on the trail. She was dabbing her mouth with her napkin when boots sounded on the porch. Sheriff Eugene Watts was a big man gone to seed, his badge sitting crooked on a vest stretched tight over his belly. He removed his hat when he entered, revealing hair the color of dirty straw. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Finch," he said, settling uninvited into the chair across from her. "Heard you arrived last night. Thought I'd come introduce myself. Make sure you understand how things work in Dead River." "I believe I understand well enough." Clarabelle said, "I'm not looking for trouble. Sheriff." "Course not. Trouble's what you're running from, ain't it?" He leaned back, chair groaning. "Got a wire from Kansas way. Says you were mixed up in some unpleasantness. Horse theft ring." "I was cleared of all charges." "So you were." Judge said insufficient evidence. He picked up her unused spoon, turned it over in his thick fingers. "Course, insufficient evidence ain't the same as innocent. Sometimes it just means the guilty party was clever, or lucky." "Or actually innocent," Clarabelle said quietly. He set the spoon down with a small clatter. "Maybe, maybe not. Point is, Dead River's a peaceful town. We aim to keep it that way. You planning on staying long?" "I haven't decided." "Well, when you do decide, might be best if you decided to move on. We got enough troubles without importing more from Kansas." He stood, settled his hat back on his head. "Oh, and Mrs. Finch. That friend of yours from last night, the one dressed like midnight, I'd be careful about accepting his charity. Man like that, his help comes dear." After he left, Clarabelle pushed her plate away. The old man had disappeared sometime during the sheriff's visit, leaving his newspaper behind. She glanced at the date, only a week old, practically fresh for a frontier town. The headline spoke of cattle prices and railroad expansion, the normal concerns of a world that kept spinning regardless of individual troubles. She spent the morning exploring Dead River, such as it was. The general store was run by a German couple who watched her browse their meager shelves with suspicious eyes. The seamstress shop was closed, a sign in the window reading, "Position available." The saloon wouldn't open until evening, but she could hear someone playing piano inside, the same melancholy tune over and over like they were trying to get it right. At the far end of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland and the road dissolved into dust, she found the cemetery. It wasn't much, a collection of wooden crosses and a few stone markers behind a fence that wouldn't keep out anything determined. She walked among the graves, reading names and dates, calculating short lives and sudden endings. Here lay Mary Watson, aged 19, taken by fever. There rested the 3 Porter children, all gone in the same week of the same year. Cholera, a voice said behind her. Took near a dozen that summer. Clarabelle turned to find a woman about her own age, though the sun had been less kind to her fair skin. She wore a faded blue dress and carried a bucket of wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, and yarrow, hardy things that could survive where roses couldn't. I'm Rebecca Walsh, the woman said. I tend the graves when I can. You're the new arrival, Mrs. Finch. It wasn't a question. In a town this small, everyone would know within hours. Yes, I didn't mean to intrude. No intrusion. The dead don't mind company. Rebecca knelt by one of the newer graves, began arranging flowers in a tin can. This here's my husband. Got himself shot 6 months back. I'm sorry for your loss. Rebecca shrugged, a gesture that spoke of grief worn smooth by repetition. He was drinking, got into an argument over cards. The other man was faster. She glanced up. That's usually how it goes here. The faster gun lives another day, until he meets someone faster still. They stood together in silence for a moment, 2 widows among the dead. Then Rebecca said, Heard you met our local ghost last night. Ghost. That's what some call him. The man in black. Shows up when he pleases, disappears just as quick. Nobody knows his real name. Nobody asks, neither. She finished with the flowers, stood and brushed dirt from her skirt. He helped me once, too, after Thomas died. Paid off our debts at the general store, left money for the funeral. Never said a word, just did it and vanished. Did he want anything in return? Rebecca's laugh was short and bitter. Men always want something, but him no. He never came back, never asked for nothing. That's what makes folks nervous. A man who takes what he wants, they understand. A man who gives without taking, that's unnatural. Makes people wonder what he's really after. They walked back toward town together, Rebecca pointing out landmarks, the tree where they'd hanged a rustler 2 years back, the spot where the old hotel had burned, taking 3 souls with it. Every place had a story, usually ending in death or departure. Word of advice, Rebecca said as they parted ways. Sheriff Watts is going to make your life miserable. He's got his own arrangement with certain folks, if you catch my meaning. Your mysterious benefactor. He's interfered with those arrangements before. Watts don't forgive and he don't forget. Clarabelle spent the afternoon in her room, mending a tear in her traveling dress and trying not to think about mysterious men and corrupt sheriffs and towns where charity was more frightening than cruelty. As evening painted the sky purple, she heard commotion in the street below. She moved to the window, peered through the curtain. A group of riders had arrived, dust still settling around their horses. They looked like cowboys just off a long drive, lean, weathered, with the restless energy of men who'd been too long without whiskey or company. They hitched their horses and headed for the saloon, whooping and laughing. All except one. He stayed mounted, scanning the street with careful eyes. His gaze swept up, caught hers through the window. He touched his hat brim, not polite, but marking, like a wolf noting the location of prey. Clarabelle stepped back, let the curtain fall, but she could feel those eyes on her window long after the man had ridden on. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and complete. Clarabelle lit her lamp, tried to read one of her husband's medical books, but the words swam before her eyes. Every sound made her start footsteps in the hall, laughter from the saloon, the wind worrying at loose boards. This was what he'd meant. She realized. Sleep with one eye open. Not just watching for danger, but waiting for it, knowing it would come, just not when or how. A soft knock at her door made her reach for the pistol. Who is it? Mrs. Pike, you've got a visitor. Clarabelle cracked the door. keeping the pistol hidden behind her skirts. Mrs. Pike stood in the hall, her face sour as curdled milk. He's waiting in the parlor, says it's important. Who? But Mrs. Pike was already retreating, her footsteps quick and frightened on the stairs. Clarabelle tucked the pistol into her pocket, felt its weight against her leg as she descended. The parlor was dimly lit, a single lamp casting more shadows than light. He stood by the window, still wearing black, still masked. When he turned to her, those pale eyes caught the lamplight like a cat's. "Evening, Mrs. Finch," he said. "I trust you've settled in." "Well enough." She stayed near the door, kept her hand close to her pocket. "Is there something you want?" "Direct. I like that." He moved away from the window, and she noticed how he kept to the shadows, never fully entering the light. "I came to give you that warning I mentioned. Those cowboys that rode in today, they're not here for the whiskey." "What then?" "You, or rather, the bounty on you." He tilted his head, studying her reaction. "Oh yes, there's paper on you. Not official, but certain interested parties in Kansas would pay well for your return. Those boys aim to collect." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer. "But I was cleared." "Law's got nothing to do with it. Man named Henderson wants you back. Wants you to pay for his sister's reputation. As he sees it, these boys don't care about guilt or innocence. They care about the $500 he's offering. 500, more than most men saw in a year. Enough to make her life worthless against the prize." "Why tell me?" "Because Dead River's got enough ghosts. Don't need another." He moved toward the door, paused beside her. This close, she could smell leather and gunpowder, the outdoors clinging to his coat. "They'll wait until you're alone. Maybe follow you from town. Make it look like you just disappeared. Maybe come for you here, if they get drunk enough." "What am I supposed to do?" "What any sensible person would do. Run." He reached for the door handle. "Course, you've been running for 300 miles already. Might be you're tired. Might be you're thinking there's nowhere left to run to. That's your choice to make. Just make it quick." He opened the door, letting in the night air and distant music. But before stepping out, he turned back one final time. "That offer of help, by the way it stands, you get into trouble you can't handle. You light a lamp in your window. 3 times. I'll see it." "Why?" The question escaped again, desperate this time. "Why do you care what happens to me?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then, "Because I know what it's like to be hunted, to have nowhere safe to rest your head. Wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not someone whose only crime was marrying the wrong man." Then he was gone, melting into the darkness beyond the door. Clarabelle stood there, trembling slightly, processing his words. Bounty hunters. $500. Henderson, her dead husband's partner's brother, who'd sworn at the trial that she'd pay for destroying his family's name. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort. In her room, she barricaded the door with the chair, checked that her pistol was loaded. Then she sat on the bed and considered her options. Run again, leave tonight, try to outpace the news of the bounty, or stay and face whatever came. Both choices seemed to lead to the same end, a shallow grave in an unmarked location. Through her window, Dead River sprawled in the darkness, a collection of lights that promised nothing good. Somewhere out there, men were drinking and planning how to collect blood money. Somewhere else, a man who wouldn't give his name watched from the shadows. She thought of his offer. Light a lamp 3 times. Call for help from someone who might be worse than the danger she faced. Or handle it herself, as she'd handled everything since the day they'd put her husband in the ground and started whispering that she'd helped put him there. Clarabelle moved to the window, stared out at the night. Her reflection stared back. Ghostly in the glass, a woman caught between running and fighting, between fear and fury. Tomorrow, those cowboys would make their move. Tonight, she had to decide whether to meet them with flight or lead. Her fingers found the matchbook on the nightstand. Such a simple thing, lighting a lamp. Such a dangerous thing, trusting a stranger in black who dealt in midnight charity and cryptic warnings. She struck a match, watched it flare and die. Once, the flame reflected in her eyes, turning them from green to gold. Twice, the sulfur smell filled her nostrils, sharp and real. 3 times. She held the match to the lamp's wick, watched it catch and bloom. Then she lifted the lamp to the window, lowered it, raised it again. 3 times, as he'd said. A signal sent into darkness, carrying a message she couldn't take back. I choose to stand and fight, but not alone, not this time. The lamp settled back on the nightstand. Clarabelle sat in the chair she'd used to block the door, pistol in her lap, and waited to see what answer the night would bring. The lamp signal brought no immediate response. Clarabelle dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake at every sound, until dawn crept through her window like a guilty secret. Her neck ached and her fingers had cramped around the pistol's grip. Outside, Dead River stirred to life with the reluctant movements of a town that had seen too many hard mornings. She washed and dressed carefully, trying to shake off the night's tensions. Perhaps she'd been foolish, lighting that lamp. Perhaps the man in black had been amusing himself with a desperate woman's fears. She tucked the pistol into her dress pocket and ventured downstairs. The dining room held 2 of the cowboys from yesterday. They looked up when she entered, their conversation stopping mid-sentence. One nudged the other, a gesture that might have seemed friendly if not for the calculating look in their eyes. Clarabelle took a seat at the far table, her back to the wall. "Morning, ma'am," the taller one said. He had sandy hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel twist to his mouth. "Name's Jake Thornton. This here's my partner, Roy Gibbs." She nodded, but didn't reply, focusing on the coffee misses. Pike grudgingly provided. "Heard you're new in town." Jake continued, "Come far on." "Far enough." "From Kansas. Maybe," Roy spoke up. He was smaller, darker, with nervous hands that couldn't stay still. "We come through Kansas ourselves. Mighty interesting stories floating around back there." Clarabelle set down her cup carefully. "I wouldn't know. I mind my own business." "Smart policy," Jake said. "Course, sometimes other folks' business has a way of becoming yours, especially when there's money involved." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clarabelle pushed back her chair, standing slowly. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen." "Oh, we ain't gentlemen," Roy laughed. "And you ain't excused, not till we finish our conversation." But Clarabelle was already moving toward the door. Jake's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Now that's just rude." The click of a pistol cocking cut him off. Not Clarabelle's, she hadn't had time to reach for hers. The sound came from the doorway, where Rebecca Walsh stood with a shotgun that looked too big for her small frame. Mrs. Finch was just leaving," Rebecca said pleasantly. "You boys want to argue about it?" Jake released Clarabelle's wrist, hands raising slightly. "No trouble here, just making conversation." "Make it elsewhere." Rebecca kept the shotgun steady. "This is a respectable establishment." "Mrs." Pike made a sound of protest from the kitchen doorway, but said nothing. Clarabelle moved past Rebecca, out onto the porch. The other woman followed, still covering the cowboys. "Thank you," Clarabelle said once they were outside. "Don't thank me yet," Rebecca replied, finally lowering the shotgun. "Those 2 are just testing the water. They'll be back, probably with friends. You need to make some decisions, and fast." They walked together down the main street, Rebecca's presence providing a temporary shield. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. At the seamstress shop, Rebecca stopped. "This was mine," she said, gesturing to the closed storefront. "Had to shut it after Thomas died. Couldn't keep up with the rent and his debts both." "I saw the sign," Position available. That's the new owner, Mr. Garrett. He's from back east, thinks he can run a sewing shop. Rebecca snorted. Man can barely thread a needle. He's desperate for help. An idea formed in Clarabelle's mind. Would he hire me? You can sew. My mother taught me. I've been mending and tailoring since I was 12. Rebecca studied her. It wouldn't pay much. And folks here, they won't make it easy for you. Not with those rumors from Kansas. Not with those boys sniffing around. I'm tired of running, Clarabelle said quietly. If I keep going, they'll just follow. At least here, I know where I stand. Rebecca nodded slowly. I'll introduce you. But Clarabelle, may I call you that this won't solve your problem. It'll just delay it. The meeting with Mr. Garrett went better than expected. He was a thin, anxious man who seemed relieved at the prospect of competent help. Within an hour, Clarabelle was employed, starting immediately. The work was familiar, soothing, even measuring, cutting, stitching. Her hands remembered the rhythm even as her mind stayed alert for danger. The shop's bell chimed throughout the day as customers came and went. Most were women who eyed Clarabelle with suspicion but grudgingly admitted she knew her work. She hemmed skirts and took in waists, let out seams for expectant mothers and patched worn trousers. Each small task was a tiny root putting down. Anchoring her to this place, she wasn't sure she wanted to stay. Late afternoon brought an unexpected customer, a young woman, barely out of her teens, with a bruised face poorly hidden by powder. She clutched a torn dress, hands shaking slightly. Can you fix this? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I need it for tonight, for work. Clarabelle recognized the dress's gaudy fabric, the low neckline, a saloon girl's costume. Of course. Sit down. Let me see. As she worked, she noticed more bruises on the girl's arms, the way she flinched at sudden movements. What's your name? Lucy. Lucy Malone. The girl watched Clarabelle's hands move. You're her, aren't you? The woman from Kansas. The one they're hunting. I'm just a seamstress. Lucy laughed, short and bitter. We're all just something, aren't we, till men decide we're something else? Clarabelle finished the repair, handed back the dress. Lucy tried to pay, but her purse held only a few coins. Keep it, Clarabelle said. Consider it a welcome gift. I'm new here too. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. You're kind. That's dangerous in Dead River. Kind people don't last. After Lucy left, Clarabelle found herself alone in the shop as evening approached. Mr. Garrett had gone home, trusting her to lock up. She was putting away supplies when she heard the scrape of boots on the boardwalk outside. Multiple sets, moving slowly. Through the window, she saw them, Jake and Roy, plus 3 more cowboys. They were checking each building, methodical as hunters. One pointed to the seamstress shop. They started forward. Clarabelle's hand went to her pistol, 5 against 1. Even if she was a perfect shot, which she wasn't, the odds were impossible. She looked around frantically, spotted the back door, but running would only delay the inevitable, and she was so tired of running. The shop bell chimed as the door opened. Jake entered first, that cruel smile wider now. Well, look what we found. Little seamstress all alone. Shop's closed, Clarabelle said, proud that her voice didn't shake. We ain't here for sewing. Roy pushed in behind Jake, the others crowding the doorway. See, we got a business proposition. You come with us, nice and quiet, and nobody gets hurt. We collect our fee. You face justice in Kansas. Simple. Justice, Clarabelle laughed. Is that what you call it? Don't matter what we call it. One of the others said, $500 is $500. Jake moved closer. Now, you can make this easy or hard, but either way, you're coming with us. No, Clarabelle said. I'm not. That's when she saw it, a shadow passing by the window. Then another. The cowboys were focused on her. Didn't notice until the shop door chimed again. "Shop's closed," Jake said without turning. "Get lost." "I heard," the man in black said, "but I've got some urgent mending needs." The cowboys spun, hands going to their guns. He stood in the doorway, relaxed as if he'd wandered in by accident. But Clarabelle saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his coat was pushed back to clear his holster. "This ain't your concern," Jake said. "We got legal business with this woman." Legal. The man in black seemed to taste the word. "That's interesting. See, I was under the impression that bounty hunting requires proper authorization. You boys happen to have any—" "We don't need—" "Yes, you do." Sheriff Watts pushed past the man in black, his badge catching the lamplight. "Least in my town you do." Clarabelle's heart sank. The sheriff was here to help them, to make it official. But Watts surprised her. "I don't recall authorizing any bounty hunters in Dead River," he continued. "In fact, I'm pretty sure I told every saddle tramp who's ridden through that we don't cut into that sort of thing here." Jake's face flushed. "Sheriff, you know there's paper on her. Henderson's offering." "Henderson can offer what he likes. Don't make it legal. Don't make it welcome in my town." Watts hooked his thumbs in his belt. "Now, you boys got two choices. Ride out tonight or spend some time in my jail for harassment. What'll it be?" The tension stretched tight as a fiddle string. Clarabelle held her breath, finger on her pistol's trigger. Then Jake spat on the floor. "This ain't over," he said. "We'll be back, with proper papers." "You do that," Watts said. "Till then, get." The cowboys filed out, each one giving Clarabelle a look that promised retribution. When they were gone, Watts turned to her. "Don't think I did that for you," he said. "I just don't like outsiders thinking they can operate in my town without permission. You're still trouble. Mrs. Finch, this just bought you time." He left without another word. Clarabelle found herself alone with the man in black, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Thank you," she managed. "The signal, I wasn't sure. I saw—" He moved to the window, watching the street. "They'll camp outside town. Wait for you to leave or for an opportunity when you're vulnerable." Why did Watts help? He didn't. He just hates having his authority challenged more than he hates you. He turned from the window. This was a temporary reprieve. Those men won't give up. Not for that kind of money. "Then what do I do?" "I told you, run." "No." The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. "I've been running for months, leaving everything behind, starting over, only to run again. I won't do it anymore." He studied her for a long moment. "Then you'll need more than a pistol and good intentions. You'll need allies. Protection. A reason for people to stand with you instead of against you." "How do I get that?" "Same way anyone does in a place like this. You earn it. You become valuable enough that losing you costs more than the bounty." He moved toward the door, then paused. "That girl who was here earlier, Lucy, she has troubles of her own. Man who runs the saloon, Bull Morrison. He's been rough with her. Too rough." "What does that have to do with—" "Everything's connected in a small town. You help her, she remembers. Her friends remember. Build enough goodwill. And when those cowboys come back, you might not stand alone." He touched his hat brim, that gesture she was beginning to recognize as his version of goodbye. "Lock up tight. Keep that pistol close. And Mrs. Finch, next time you light that lamp, make sure you mean it. I might not always be watching." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the shop with the shadows gathering in the corners. Clarabelle locked the door, checked the windows, then sat at the sewing table with her pistol beside the pincushion. Outside, Dead River went about its evening business laughter from the saloon, horses clopping past, a woman calling her children home. She thought about what he'd said. Earn your place. Become valuable. It seemed an impossible task when the whole town already saw her as a pariah. But she thought of Lucy's grateful tears, of Rebecca's unexpected alliance. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to build something here besides a reputation as a runaway. Her fingers found a piece of fabric, began stitching without conscious thought. The repetitive motion calmed her nerves, gave her hands something to do besides shake. She would go back to the boarding house soon, face another night of wondering when the cowboys would strike. But for now, she sat in her small circle of lamplight and sewed, each stitch a tiny act of defiance against those who wanted her gone. Tomorrow she would start building those alliances. Tomorrow she would find a way to make Dead River need her more than it feared her. Tonight, though, she would finish this piece, a simple handkerchief with delicate embroidery around the edges. Something beautiful in a place that had little beauty to spare. The man in black had given her advice, but Clarabelle suspected he'd done more than that, by appearing when he did, by standing with her however briefly. He'd shown the town something, that she wasn't entirely alone, that someone, even if that someone was a mystery wrapped in midnight, thought her worth protecting. It wasn't much, but in a place like Dead River, where life was cheap and justice was whatever men with guns said it was, even small gestures carried weight. She would need every ounce of that weight in the days to come. The cowboys would return. Henderson wouldn't give up. And somewhere out there in the darkness, a masked man kept watch for lamp signals from desperate women. Clarabelle smiled grimly and kept stitching. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. Not with guns, she knew her limits there, but with needle and thread. With small kindnesses and stubborn persistence. She would weave herself into the fabric of this town so tightly that removing her would leave holes too big to mend. Let them come. She was tired of running. It was time to see if a seamstress could outmaneuver bounty hunters, if reputation could be altered like a hemline, if a woman could choose her own pattern instead of following the one men laid out for her. The decision came 3 nights later, after Jake and his men had made 2 more attempts to corner her, once at the well behind the boarding house, where only misses. Pike's screaming about propriety had driven them off. Once on her way to the shop, where a group of miners heading to work had inadvertently provided cover. She couldn't count on luck forever. "You look tired," Rebecca said, finding Clarabelle at the shop during the noon lull. "When's the last time you really slept?" "Tuesday," Clarabelle admitted, then laughed weakly. "What day is it now?" "Friday." Rebecca set down a basket. "I brought food. You need to eat." They shared bread and cheese in companionable silence. Through the window, Clarabelle could see one of the cowboys lounging against a post across the street, keeping watch. They'd grown bolder, no longer hiding their surveillance. "I can't keep living like this," Clarabelle said finally. "No," Rebecca agreed. "You can't. So what are you going to do about it?" That evening, Clarabelle lit the lamp again. 3 times, as before, but this time, when the man in black appeared, it wasn't at the boarding house. A soft knock came at the shop's back door just after sunset. "You're going to get me killed," she said, letting him in. "If they see you here." "They won't." He moved through the darkened shop like he belonged to the shadows. "They're watching the front. Always do. Men like that don't think about back doors." He paused by her work table, fingered a piece of lace she'd been working on. "Fine work." "I need help," Clarabelle said, too exhausted for pretense. "Real help, not just warnings and midnight rescues." "What did you have in mind?" "Somewhere safe, just for a night or 2. Somewhere I can actually sleep without jumping at every sound." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, there's a place, abandoned cabin up on the ridge, about an hour's ride north. Used to belong to a trapper, but he died 2 winters back. Nobody goes there now." "I don't have a horse." "You do now. There's a mare tied out back. Nothing fancy, but she'll get you there." He pulled something from his coat, a rough map sketched on brown paper. "Follow the creek until you see the lightning-struck pine. Turn east. Follow the deer trail. Cabin sits in a clearing just past the second rise. Clarabelle studied the map in the dim light filtering through the windows. Why are you helping me, really? Maybe I don't like seeing wolves circle a lamb. I'm no lamb. No, he agreed. You're not. That's why you're still alive. He moved toward the door. There's food in the saddlebags. Water, too, enough for several days if needed. What about my job if I disappear? Tell Garrett you're ill. Rebecca will cover for you. She's good at that. He paused with his hand on the door. One more thing. You won't be alone up there. Clarabelle's heart sank. The cowboys know about it. No, but I'll be watching. Don't look for me. You won't see me. But if trouble comes, I'll know. Before she could respond, he was gone. Clarabelle stood there, map in hand, weighing her options. Stay and face another sleepless night, another day of cat and mouse with increasingly desperate men. Or trust a stranger's directions to a cabin that might not exist, protected by a man who might be worse than the danger she fled. She made her decision quickly, before doubt could take root, gathering a few essentials from the shop scissors. Thread. A heavy shawl she slipped out the back door. The mare was there as promised, a sturdy brown animal with patient eyes. The saddlebags held hardtack, jerky, canned peaches, and 2 canteens of water. Clarabelle had learned to ride as a girl, though it had been years. She mounted awkwardly, grateful for the divided skirt that allowed her to ride astride. The mare seemed to know she was inexperienced, moving with careful steps as they left Dead River behind. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. She followed the creek as instructed, the sound of water a constant companion. Every noise made her tense the cry of an owl, the rustle of sagebrush, the mare's occasional snort. But gradually, the further she got from town, the more her shoulders relaxed. She found the lightning-struck pine easily enough, its skeletal remains stark against the sky. The deer trail was harder to spot, but the mare seemed to know the way. They climbed steadily, the town's lights disappearing behind rises and ridges until Clarabelle felt truly alone for the first time in weeks. The cabin appeared just as he'd said, a small structure of weathered logs nestled in a clearing. It looked solid enough, though the door hung slightly crooked and weeds grew tall around the walls. Clarabelle dismounted, legs shaky from the unaccustomed ride. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean. Someone had swept recently, laid fresh wood by the fireplace, even left matches and a lamp on the rough table. A narrow bed with a straw mattress occupied one corner, covered with blankets that smelled of cedar. Simple but safe. Clarabelle tended the mare first, using skills half-remembered from childhood. There was a lean-to shelter behind the cabin and a bucket for water from the nearby stream. Only when the animal was settled did she allow herself to explore her temporary refuge. The previous occupant had left little behind a few traps hanging on the wall. A coffee pot black with use, some chipped dishes, but someone she suspected who had added newer supplies, canned goods on a shelf, soap and towels, even a small mirror, preparations for a woman's comfort. She built a small fire, more for companionship than warmth. The flames danced, casting moving shadows on the log walls. For the first time in days, Clarabelle felt her guard dropping. No one knew she was here except the man who'd sent her. No cowboys watching from across the street. No sheriff making veiled threats. No townspeople judging her with every glance. She heated water, washed the trail dust from her face and hands, found hardtack and jerky in her supplies, made a simple meal. Everything tasted better here, seasoned with solitude and safety. After eating, she sat by the fire, watching the flames and thinking, who was he, this man who helped women in trouble not for gain, according to Rebecca, not for the usual reasons men had, just a ghost in black who appeared when needed, asking nothing in return. It didn't make sense. In her experience, everyone wanted something. A sound outside made her reach for her pistol. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Then a voice, muffled by the door. It's me, just checking you made it. Clarabelle lowered the gun. Opened the door. He stood at the edge of the firelight, horse behind him like a shadow. "You won't sleep alone tonight," he said, echoing words from their first meeting. "But I'll be out here, not in there." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He moved to the lean-to, began unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency. Those cowboys might be stupid, but they're not completely stupid. They'll notice you're gone by morning. Might even be smart enough to look for tracks. Then they'll find this place. "No, I covered your trail for the last mile. And there are other tracks leading other directions. False trails. They'll waste days following them." He spread a bedroll under the lean-to's shelter. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Finch. Real sleep. You need it." Clarabelle wanted to protest, to say she didn't need protecting, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones, and the bed looked more inviting than anything she'd seen in weeks. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "This is just a respite, not a solution. Come morning, we need to talk about what happens next." She went inside, barred the door from within. Through the single window, she could see him settling against a post, rifle across his knees, standing guard, as promised. She should have been uncomfortable, knowing he was there. Instead, she felt safer than she had since leaving Kansas. The bed was hard and smelled of must, but Clarabelle sank into it gratefully. She kept the pistol close out of habit, but for once didn't grip it tight. The fire crackled. Wind whispered through the logs, and somewhere outside, a man she didn't really know kept watch. Sleep, when it came, was deep and dreamless. No jerking awake at phantom sounds, no planning escape routes in the dark. Just blessed unconsciousness, the kind that knits up raveled nerves and lets the mind finally rest. She woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the logs and the smell of coffee. Disoriented, it took a moment to remember where she was. The cabin, the ridge, safety, however temporary. Outside, she found him tending a small fire, coffee pot balanced on stones above the flames. He'd removed his hat, but kept the bandana in place. In daylight, she could see his hair was dark, touched with early silver at the temples. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's almost ready." She sat on a log across from him, accepted the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in, but she didn't complain. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the morning mist burn off the valley below. "I need to know your name," Clarabelle said finally. "I can't keep calling you the man in black in my head." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Morgan Holt." The name hit her like cold water. She'd heard it whispered in town, always with fear or awe. The outlaw who robbed from the rich, the ghost who appeared and disappeared at will, the man with a bounty on his head that made hers look like pocket change. She stopped, swallowed. "Why would you risk helping me? You've got your own troubles." "Maybe that's why." He poured more coffee. Movements unhurried. Man spends enough time running. He learns to recognize others doing the same. Difference is, I chose my path. You got pushed onto yours. "I could turn you in. The reward would solve all my problems." "You could." He met her eyes over the bandana. "Will you?" "No." The answer came without thought. "No, I won't." "Then we understand each other." He stood, kicked dirt over the fire. "You can stay here a few days. Rest, plan, decide what comes next. I'll make sure those cowboys stay confused about your whereabouts." And then you got the same choices as before. Run to a new town, hope the past don't follow, or go back to Dead River and fight for your place. He moved toward his horse. "Either way, the decision's yours. But Mrs. Finch, that second option's going to take more than just courage. It's going to take changing how the whole town sees you." "How do I do that?" He swung into the saddle with that easy grace she envied. "Same way I did. Become someone they need more than they fear. Become part of their story, not just a problem passing through." He touched his hat brim, That familiar gesture. "I'll be back tonight. Stay close to the cabin. There's a rifle inside if you need it, though I don't expect trouble." Not yet. Then he was gone, leaving Clarabelle alone with her thoughts and the empty coffee cups. She cleaned up mechanically, then explored the area around the cabin. A small garden plot showed signs of ancient cultivation. Wild herbs grew among the weeds yarrow. Sage, plants her husband had taught her to recognize. The day passed peacefully. She mended clothes, gathered herbs, even managed a short nap in the afternoon sun. No one disturbed her solitude. No threats materialized from the trees. It was, she realized, the first truly quiet day she'd had in months. As shadows lengthened, she prepared for his return, built up the fire, heated beans from the supplies, even attempted biscuits in the ancient Dutch oven she found. They turned out lopsided but edible. She was pulling them from the coals when hoofbeats announced his arrival. "Smells good," he said, dismounting. There was dust on his clothes, weariness in his movements. "Trouble?" she asked. "Nothing I couldn't handle. Your friends spent the day chasing their tails 20 miles south. Sheriff's getting involved now. Doesn't like the disorder they're causing." He accepted the plate she offered. "You look better, rested." "I slept, really slept." She sat beside him, not across this time. "It's been so long I'd forgotten what that felt like." They ate quietly, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks dancing upward. It was domestic in a way that made Clarabelle's chest tight with unnamed emotion. "I want to go back," she said suddenly. "To Dead River. I want to fight for my place." He nodded as if he'd expected this. "It won't be easy." "Nothing has been—" She turned to look at him, this outlaw who'd become her unlikely protector. "Will you help me not just with the cowboys, but with changing things?" "I'll do what I can," he said, "but the real work, that's got to come from you. I can't make them accept you. All I can do is buy you time to make yourself indispensable." "That's enough." She stood, began clearing the dishes. "That's more than anyone else has offered." 3 days at the cabin restored more than just Clarabelle's strength. It gave her time to think, to plan, to remember skills beyond running and hiding. On the morning she decided to return to Dead River. She packed the herbs she'd gathered: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, sage for purification. Her husband's knowledge, at least, could serve her now. Morgan escorted her back, taking a winding route that avoided the main trails. As they neared town, he reined in his horse. "The cowboys gave up searching yesterday, rode out toward Tucson, probably hoping to catch you there, but they'll be back when they realize you didn't run that way." "How long do I have?" "Week, maybe 2. Long enough if you use it wisely." He studied the town below, smoke rising from morning fires. "There's sickness in town. Started 2 days ago. The Muller children first, now spreading." "What kind of sickness?" "Fever, cough. Could be nothing. Could be something worse." He turned his horse away. "Might be your chance to change some minds." Clarabelle found Dead River subdued, the usual bustle replaced by worried faces and hushed conversations. At the boarding house, Mrs. Pike barely looked up from her knitting. "Back, are you?" the woman said. "Thought you'd run off for good." "I was visiting a friend," Clarabelle said calmly. "I heard there's sickness." "Mrs." Pike's needles clicked faster. "The Muller boy's bad off. Dr. Hayworth's done what he can, but—" She trailed off, shook her head. Dr. Hayworth was a drunk who'd lost his license back east. Everyone knew it, but he was all Dead River had. Clarabelle changed into a clean dress, pinned her hair severely back, and headed for the Muller house. She found chaos. 5 children, ages 3 to 12, all showing signs of illness. Their mother, Emma Muller, looked exhausted, trying to tend them all while keeping up with the laundry and cooking. Dr. Hayworth sat in the corner, reeking of whiskey, mumbling about bleeding the patients. "Mrs. Muller," Clarabelle said firmly. I have some experience with fevers. May I help? Emma looked between her and the doctor, desperation winning over propriety. Please, anything. Clarabelle took charge. First, she sent the doctor away. He left without protest, probably eager for another drink. Then she examined each child carefully, remembering her husband's teachings. High fever, persistent cough, but no rash. Not scarlet fever, then, more likely, influenza. Serious but manageable if treated properly. I need willow bark tea for the fever, she told Emma. And we need to get fluids into them. Honey and water, a little salt. Can you manage that? For the next hours, Clarabelle worked tirelessly. She showed Emma how to cool the children with damp cloths, how to prop them up to ease breathing, how to coax spoonfuls of honeyed water between cracked lips. The oldest boy, Hans, was the worst, his fever so high he barely responded. My husband was a doctor, Clarabelle explained as she worked. A real one, not like Hayworth. He taught me things. The one who died, Emma asked. The one mixed up in that trouble. He made mistakes, Clarabelle said carefully. Got desperate when his practice failed, trusted the wrong people, but he was a good doctor. He would have helped your children. By evening, 2 of the younger children's fevers had broken. Hans still burned hot, but he was taking fluids. Clarabelle prepared to leave, but Emma caught her arm. Stay, please, I'll pay. No payment needed. Clarabelle squeezed the woman's hand. I'll be back first thing tomorrow. Word spread quickly. By morning, 3 more families had sick children. Clarabelle found herself going house to house, teaching mothers what she'd taught Emma. She organized the women into shifts, caring for the sickest while others prepared broths and teas. Rebecca joined her, learning quickly and taking over when Clarabelle needed rest. On the 3rd day, she ran out of willow bark. The general store had none missed her. Hoffman claimed he couldn't get supplies with the road so dangerous. Clarabelle knew better. He could get supplies. He just didn't see profit in medicine for poor families. That evening, exhausted and discouraged, she found a package on her doorstep. Willow bark, feverfew, and other medicinal herbs, wrapped in oilcloth. No note, but she recognized the knots in the twine. Morgan's work. She didn't know how he'd gotten the supplies or where from, and she didn't care. It was enough that sick children would have medicine. The fever spread for a week before beginning to retreat. Clarabelle barely slept, moving between houses like a ghost herself. She held Hans Muller's hand through the worst night, when his mother was certain they'd lose him. She sang to the Patterson baby when coughing kept her awake. She taught Lucy from the saloon how to brew medicinal teas when the girl showed up wanting to help. Not everyone accepted her ministrations. Some families turned her away, preferring Dr. Hayworth's dubious treatments or no treatment at all. But enough welcomed her that slowly, perceptions began to shift. She was no longer just the woman from Kansas with a murky past. She was the woman who'd saved the Muller children, who'd spent nights nursing the sick without asking for payment. Sheriff Watts visited on the 8th day, finding her at the Carlson house tending to their twin daughters. Heard you've been playing doctor, he said. I've been helping where I can, Clarabelle replied, not pausing in her work. Also heard those cowboys sniffing around your trail have headed back this way. Seems they figured out you never went to Tucson. Her hand stilled briefly on the compress she was preparing. When? Day or 2, maybe 3. He watched her resume working. Funny thing is, Mrs. Carlson here's been telling everyone how you saved her girls. The Mullers, too. Getting harder to find folks who'd be happy to see you dragged back to Kansas. Mrs. Carlson looked up from her sewing. Anyone tries to take Mrs. Finch, they'll answer to me, and plenty others feel the same. Watts touched his hat. Just thought you should know. About the cowboys. I mean, he left without his usual threats or warnings. That night, Clarabelle finally returned to her room, so tired she could barely climb the stairs. She found Morgan waiting in the shadows by her window. You've been busy, he said. There was need. She sank into her chair. Thank you for the herbs. Couldn't have sick children suffering for want of medicine. He moved closer to the light, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes too. The cowboys are coming. 3 days out, moving careful. They've hired 2 more guns. 7 men now. Clarabelle closed her eyes. I'm so tired of being afraid. Then don't be. His voice was quiet, but firm. You've changed things here, shown them who you really are. When those men come, they won't find the same town they left. 7 guns against whatever goodwill I've earned. You'd be surprised what goodwill can do. He moved toward the window. Keep helping. Keep being visible. And when they come, don't run. Stand your ground right in the middle of Main Street if you have to. Make them show their true colors in front of everyone. After he left, Clarabelle lay in bed thinking. The fever was breaking throughout town. Children recovering, families grateful. She'd found a place here, tentative but real. The thought of losing it to men who saw her as nothing but a payday made her angry in a way that pushed past fear. The next morning brought good news. Hans Muller was sitting up, demanding food. His mother wept with relief, pressing Clarabelle's hands. You saved him. You saved all of them. They saved themselves. Clarabelle said, they're strong children. Like their nurse. Emma said, will you stay after your troubles are settled? We need someone with your skills. If the town will have me. The town will fight for you, Emma said fiercely. You'll see. That afternoon, Clarabelle was at the general store buying what supplies Hoffman would sell her when Lucy burst in. They're coming, the girl gasped. The cowboys. Ben from the livery saw them less than an hour out. Clarabelle's heart hammered, but she forced herself to move calmly. Thank you for telling me. What will you do? She thought of Morgan's words. Stand your ground. I'll be at the seamstress shop, working like any other day. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time Clarabelle reached the shop, people were gathering on the street. Not many, but more than she'd expected. Emma Mueller with several other mothers. Rebecca with her shotgun. Even Lucy, pale but determined. You don't have to do this, Clarabelle told them. Yes, we do, Rebecca said simply. You stayed when our children were sick. We'll stay now. Clarabelle entered the shop, took up her sewing. Her hands trembled, but the familiar motion helped. Through the window, she watched the street. More people appeared. Mr. Carlson, the Patterson family. Some of the miners who'd inadvertently helped her before. Not a mob, not an army, but a presence. Then she saw them. 7 riders coming down Main Street, Jake in the lead. They slowed at the sight of the crowd, exchanging glances. This wasn't what they'd expected, a town protecting the woman they'd come to collect. Jake dismounted, hand resting on his gun. We're here for Clarabelle Finch. Legal bounty. Nobody needs to get hurt. Show us the papers, Sheriff Watts said, stepping from the crowd. Real papers, not some promise from a vengeful man. Jake produced a folded document. Watts examined it, shook his head. This isn't legal. It's just a letter from Henderson saying he'll pay. That's not how bounty hunting works, boys. $500 says different, Roy called out. $500 means nothing to dead men, a new voice said. Morgan stepped from between buildings, coat pushed back, hand near his gun. The cowboys tensed, recognizing the threat he represented. Professional killer against hired thugs, they knew how that would end. This isn't your business, Jake said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Everything in this town's my business. Morgan moved closer, and the crowd parted for him. The lady's under my protection, has been since she arrived. You want her, you go through me. And me, Rebecca added, raising her shotgun. Us too, Emma Muller said, her recovering children peeking from behind her skirts. One by one, voices joined. Not everyone, plenty of townsfolk stayed silent or absent, but enough. Enough to show Jake and his men that taking Clarabelle wouldn't be the easy payday they'd imagined. Jake looked around, calculating odds. 7 guns against one famous outlaw, 1 woman with a shotgun, and a crowd of citizens who might scatter at the first shot, but might not. And even if they won, even if they took Clarabelle, they'd have to get her out of town, across territory where Morgan knew every trail. "This ain't over," Jake finally said. "Yes, it is." Watts stepped forward. "You boys are done here. Ride out now, or I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace. And Jake, tell Henderson his money's no good in Dead River. We protect our own." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Jake spat in the dust, mounted his horse. "You've made a mistake, Sheriff. All of you." They rode out slowly, with whatever dignity they could salvage. The crowd watched until they disappeared, then began to disperse. Clarabelle emerged from the shop on shaking legs. "Thank you," she said to the air, to everyone, to the town that had chosen her over gold. "You earned it," Morgan said quietly, passing close. "Keep earning it." Then he was gone, melting back into whatever shadows he inhabited. The others crowded around Emma, hugging her, Lucy crying, Rebecca smiling her stern smile. They walked her back to the boarding house like an honor guard, protection and acceptance combined. That night, Clarabelle sat in her room thinking about roots and belonging, about the strange paths that led from running to standing firm. The cowboys might return. Henderson might hire others. But something had shifted in Dead River. She was no longer just passing through. She was part of the fabric now, woven in with threads of mercy and medicine, kindness and courage. Outside her window, the town settled into evening routines. Somewhere, Morgan kept his watch. Somewhere else, families tucked in children who lived because she'd helped them fight fever. It wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the place she'd chosen, but it was hers now, claimed with willow bark tea and midnight courage, protected by an outlaw's promise and a community's gratitude. She picked up her sewing, working by lamplight. Tomorrow there would be more challenges, more tests. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Kansas, Clarabelle Finch was home. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Clarabelle settled into a routine mornings at the shop, afternoons making house calls to check on recovering patients, evenings preparing medicines and mending clothes. The town, having stood for her once, seemed to accept her presence with less suspicion. She even received nods of greeting on the street, a courtesy previously withheld. Then came the night fire painted the sky orange. Clarabelle woke to shouting and the acrid smell of smoke. Through her window, she saw flames leaping from buildings at the far end of Main Street. She dressed quickly, grabbed her medical supplies, and rushed downstairs. The town was in chaos. Men formed bucket brigades while women hurried children to safety. The fire had started in the old warehouse district but was spreading fast, driven by desert wind. Already 2 buildings were fully engulfed. "The saloon!" someone shouted. "It's heading for the saloon!" Clarabelle pushed through the crowd, looking for wounded. She found her first patient propped against a water trough, a man who'd burned his hands trying to save goods from his store. As she wrapped his wounds, she heard a sound that made her blood cold. Gunfire. Through the smoke came riders, 15 or more, bandanas covering their faces. Not Jake's cowboys, these were different. Professional, taking advantage of the chaos. They shot into the air, herding panicked townsfolk while others broke into shops, stuffing saddlebags with whatever they could grab. "The bank," Sheriff Watts shouted, trying to rally resistance. "They're going for the bank." But most men were fighting the fire, saving their homes and families. The raiders had timed it perfectly. Clarabelle pressed bandages into the burned man's good hand and moved toward more wounded, keeping low, trying to stay invisible. A woman screamed. Through the smoke, Clarabelle saw Lucy being dragged from the saloon by one of the raiders. The girl fought, but she was no match for the man's strength. Without thinking, Clarabelle ran forward. "Let her go!" she shouted. The raider turned, saw a lone woman, and laughed. His mistake. From the shadows came a figure in black, moving fast and silent. Morgan's fist connected with the man's jaw, dropping him instantly. Lucy scrambled free, and Clarabelle pulled her to safety. "Get to the church," Morgan ordered, already turning back to the fight. "Stone walls, safest place." Clarabelle half-carried Lucy through the chaos. Around them, the battle-raged townsmen finally organizing against the raiders, gunfire mixing with the roar of flames. They reached the church where women and children huddled, and Clarabelle immediately set to work treating injuries. Burns, cuts from broken glass, a child trampled in the panic. She worked by lamplight, Rebecca assisting, while outside the fight continued. Through the windows, they could see muzzle flashes, hear shouts and screams. Then, gradually, the gunfire diminished. The raiders were retreating, driven off, but not before causing terrible damage. Dawn revealed the cost: 3 buildings completely destroyed, several more damaged. The bank had held Sheriff Watts, and a handful of men had managed to defend it, but shops were looted, homes ransacked, and worst of all, 4 townsfolk lay dead, including old Mr. Patterson, who'd had a weak heart and couldn't escape the smoke. Clarabelle worked through the day, treating burns and smoke inhalation. The dead were laid out in the church, and she helped prepare them for burial. Remembering her husband's lessons about dignity in death, it was there Morgan found her, kneeling beside Mrs. Patterson as the new widow wept. "You need rest," he said quietly. "There's too much to do." There always is after something like this. He helped her to her feet, steadied her when exhaustion made her sway. "Come on, just for an hour." He led her to a quiet spot behind the church, made her sit on an old bench. In daylight, she could see he'd been wounded a graze along his left arm, blood staining his shirt. "You're hurt," she said, reaching automatically for her supplies. "It's nothing." But he let her clean and bind the wound, sitting still under her ministrations. "Could have been worse. Would have been. If we hadn't been ready." "Ready?" "I've been watching those raiders for weeks. Knew they'd hit Dead River eventually. Just didn't know when." He flexed his bandaged arm, testing the binding. "They got less than they hoped, and they lost men doing it. 4 of ours dead. How is that a victory?" "Because it could have been 40. His pale eyes were serious. "This is the frontier. Clarabelle, death comes easy. The fact that this town stood and fought, saved what it could, that's victory enough." She wanted to argue, to say that any death was too many, but she'd learned enough about this harsh land to know he was right. Survival itself was an achievement. "Why did they attack during the fire?" she asked. "Did they start it?" "Probably, or saw the opportunity and took it. Doesn't matter now." He stood, scanned the area with habitual caution. "What matters is rebuilding, and this town will. It always does." The next days passed in a blur of funerals and construction. The whole town turned out to bury the dead, differences set aside in shared grief. Clarabelle stood with the other women, offered what comfort she could to the grieving. Sheriff Watts gave a speech about courage and community that almost made her forget her distrust of him. Then came the rebuilding. Men who'd barely spoken to her now worked alongside as she helped organize supplies, tend injuries from construction accidents, distribute food to families whose homes were damaged. She found herself at the center of the relief efforts, her medical knowledge and organizational skills desperately needed. It was while distributing blankets to burned-out families that Bull Morrison approached her. The saloon owner was a large man with scarred knuckles and mean eyes. She'd avoided him since arriving, knowing his reputation for violence, especially toward the women who worked for him. "Heard you helped Lucy during the raid," he said. "Anyone would have." "No, they wouldn't." He shifted, uncomfortable with whatever he'd come to say. "She's a good girl, too good for my place. but she's got nowhere else, no other work. What do you want, Mr. Morrison? I want to make a deal. You teach her your trade, the healing, the sewing, whatever. Give her options. In return, I'll support you. Publicly. My word carries weight with certain folk. Clarabelle studied him. A brutal man offering unexpected kindness, or at least practicality. And Lucy, what does she want? Ask her yourself, but I think you know the answer. She did. Lucy had been at her side throughout the crisis, eager to learn, quick to help. The girl deserved better than what life had given her. Send her to me, Clarabelle said. I'll teach her what I can. Morrison nodded and left without another word. That afternoon, Lucy appeared at the shop with a small bundle of possessions and hope in her eyes. You mean it? She asked. You'll really teach me? If you're willing to work hard. I'll work harder than anyone, Lucy promised, and Clarabelle believed her. As the town slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a place like Dead River, changes became apparent. The shared crisis had shifted things, broken down some barriers. Clarabelle found herself invited to town meetings, asked for opinions on health matters, consulted about sanitation to prevent disease. One evening, as she and Lucy worked on mending donated clothes for displaced families, Rebecca visited with news. They're forming a town council, she said. A real one, not just Watts and his cronies. They want you to serve on it. Clarabelle nearly dropped her needle. I've only been here 2 months. 2 months in which you've saved children, faced down bounty hunters, worked tirelessly through catastrophe, and earned more respect than some who've been here for years. Rebecca smiled. Besides, they need someone who understands medicine. Hayworth finally drank himself to death last week. Clarabelle hadn't heard. She felt a pang of sadness for the man's wasted life, but couldn't deny the town needed better medical care. Would they really accept me knowing my past? Your past is Kansas, Rebecca said firmly. Your present is Dead River. That's what matters now. That night, Clarabelle walked the rebuilt section of Main Street, seeing progress in new timber frames and fresh foundations. The saloon was operating from a tent while rebuilding. The general store had reopened with boards over its broken windows. Life persevered, stubborn as desert weeds. She found Morgan at their usual meeting spot, the shadows behind the church. He leaned against the wall, a familiar silhouette in the darkness. Heard about the council position? He said without preamble. News travels fast. Always does in small towns. He shifted, and moonlight caught his eyes. You'll accept? I don't know. It feels presumptuous. I'm still an outsider. No, you're not. His voice held certainty. You stopped being an outsider the night you stayed with the Muller children. Everything since has just been confirmation. And you? She asked. Are you an outsider? I'll always be outside. It's the path I chose. He paused. But that doesn't mean I don't protect what matters. The town, among other things. There was weight in those words, meaning she wasn't ready to examine. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars appear above the damaged and healing town. I should go, Clarabelle finally said. Lucy's staying at the boarding house now. I promised to help her with her letters before bed. Teaching her to read and write and figure. She's quick, just never had the chance. She smiled in the darkness. She wants to be more than what life assigned her. I understand that feeling. So do I. Morgan straightened, preparing to disappear into the night as always. Take the council position. Clarabelle, the town needs voices like yours. Voices that speak for healing instead of hardness. After he vanished, Clarabelle walked slowly back to the boarding house. Through windows, she saw families settling for the night, families she'd helped save, in small ways and large. Tomorrow she would accept the council position. Tomorrow she would continue building something worth protecting. But tonight, She climbed the stairs to find Lucy waiting, slate and chalk ready, eager to learn. They worked by lamplight, the girl's determination matching her own. 2 women refusing the roles assigned them, writing new stories 1 letter at a time. Outside, Dead River slept fitfully, scarred but surviving. Somewhere in the darkness, an outlaw kept watch, and in a small room above a boarding house, a woman who'd arrived as a fugitive taught another fugitive to write her own name, both of them becoming more than their pasts, with each careful stroke of chalk on slate. The fire had tested them all, but from ashes came not just rebuilding, but transformation. The town that emerged would be different, still harsh, still dangerous, but with space for those willing to earn their place through service instead of force. And at its heart, helping to guide that change, would be a widow from Kansas who'd learned that sometimes the best way to stop running was to stand still and let roots grow deep, even in the rockiest soil. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a circuit rider who looked relieved to hand it over. Clarabelle recognized the Kansas postmark with a sinking heart. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it in the privacy of the shop's back room. Mrs. Finch, it read in careful script. This is to inform you that Mr. Josiah Henderson has obtained a formal warrant for your arrest, signed by Judge William Cartwright. You are charged with conspiracy in the theft of 17 horses and the death of Thomas Henderson. A federal marshal has been dispatched to retrieve you. Consider this a courtesy warning from one who believes in justice, not vengeance. You have perhaps 2 weeks. Use them wisely. It was unsigned, but the handwriting looked familiar, perhaps the court clerk who'd always been kind during the trial. Clarabelle read it twice, then sat heavily in her chair. A federal warrant. A real marshal. This was different from bounty hunters seeking quick profit. Lucy found her there an hour later, still holding the letter. The girl read it quickly, her face paling. You can't let them take you back. They'll hang you for sure. They might, Clarabelle agreed. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Henderson has money, influence, and his brother is dead. Someone has to pay. But you didn't do anything. I married a desperate man who made terrible choices. Sometimes that's crime enough. She folded the letter carefully. I need to think. That evening, the newly formed town council held its first official meeting. Clarabelle sat between Rebecca and Mr. Garrett, trying to focus on discussions of water rights and road repairs, while her mind churned with the letter's implications. Sheriff Watts led the meeting with surprising efficiency, his usual bluster replaced by genuine concern for the town's future. We need to address the lawlessness on the eastern road, he was saying. Those raiders will be back if we don't. Sheriff, a voice interrupted from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but this is urgent. Deputy Carl Morrison, no relation to Bull, stood there, hat in hand. Just got word. Federal marshal heading this way. Should be here within the week. Every eye in the room turned to Clarabelle. She kept her face calm, though her heart raced. I'm aware, she said quietly. I received notice this morning. You knew, Watts leaned forward, and you still came to the meeting. Should I have hidden instead that worked so well before? She met his gaze steadily. I'm tired of running. Sheriff, whatever happens, happens. Not in my town, it doesn't. Emma Muller spoke up. Mrs. Finch saved my children, half the children in Dead River. We won't just hand her over. It's a federal warrant, Watts said heavily. That's different from bounty hunters. We can't just run a marshal off. Then what do we do, Mr. Carlson asked. We follow the law, Clarabelle said, surprising everyone. When the marshal arrives, I'll meet with him, present my case. I was acquitted once. By a local court. Watts interrupted. This is federal. Henderson must have called in favors, pushed the right people. They're charging you with conspiracy and murder now, not just theft. Murder, Rebecca's voice was sharp. Whose murder? Clarabelle closed her eyes. Thomas Henderson, Josiah's brother. He died during the raid on the ranch where the stolen horses were kept. My husband was treating his wounds when the vigilantes arrived. They shot everyone there, including Thomas. But you weren't even present, Lucy protested from where she sat taking notes. No, but they're claiming I knew about the operation, helped plan it, that I sent my husband there, knowing violence was likely. She opened her eyes. It's not true, but truth and law don't always align. The room erupted in arguments, some calling for resistance, others for negotiation. Clarabelle let it wash over her, thinking about choices and consequences. When the noise finally died, she stood. I need 3 days, she said, to put my affairs in order, to make arrangements for Lucy's continued training, to decide. Decide what? Watts asked. Whether to face this here or elsewhere. She left before anyone could respond, walking through darkened streets to the place she knew he'd be. Morgan materialized from the shadows as she approached the old cottonwood at the edge of town. You heard? She asked. I heard. He studied her in the moonlight. Federal marshals are different. More dangerous because they're usually honest men doing a hard job. Can't just scare them off or buy them out. I know. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the night chill. What would you do? I'm the wrong person to ask. I chose the outlaw path long ago. He was quiet for a moment. But you're not me. You've built something here. That matters. Does it matter enough the town can't fight federal law forever? No, but they might not have to. He moved closer, and she could see his eyes above the ever-present bandana. The warrant says conspiracy and murder. Those are harder to prove than simple theft, especially if you have witnesses to speak for your character. Evidence of your husband's actions being his own. The witnesses are here, not in Kansas. Henderson has influence there. Then maybe the trial shouldn't be in Kansas. He pulled something from his coat, a folded paper. Federal warrants mean federal jurisdiction. The marshal has some discretion about where to hold you for trial. If the town stands firm, if you have legal representation, he might agree to a hearing here first. You've thought about this. I think about a lot of things. He handed her the paper. Name of a lawyer in Tucson. He's honest, owes me a favor. If you decide to fight this legally, he'll come. She took the paper, their fingers brushing briefly. And if I decide not to fight legally, then you disappear. Tonight, I know places where federal marshals don't go, where a woman with medical skills could start fresh. His voice softened. But that's not what you want, is it? No. The admission came out as a whisper. I'm tired of starting fresh. I want to stand and fight, but I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you smart. It's when you stop being afraid that you make fatal mistakes. He stepped back. 3 days. You said, use them wisely. The next morning, Clarabelle threw herself into preparations. She wrote detailed notes on all her patients, instructions for Lucy on continuing treatments. She organized the medical supplies, labeled everything clearly. If she had to leave by choice or force, she'd ensure continuity of care. Lucy shadowed her everywhere, absorbing final lessons with desperate intensity. You're not giving up, are you? The girl asked as they prepared poultices. I'm being practical. Whatever happens, you need to be ready to continue this work. I won't let them take you. None of us will. Clarabelle touched the girl's cheek gently. Some things can't be stopped by good intentions. But Lucy, whatever happens, know this: you're going to be magnificent. You have the hands of a healer and the heart of a fighter. Don't let anyone tell you different. On the second day, unexpected support arrived. Bull Morrison appeared at the shop with a locked strongbox. What's this? Clarabelle asked. Defense fund, he said gruffly. Folks have been contributing. Figure if you're going to fight this legal-like, you'll need money for that lawyer. She opened the box, gasped at the contents. More money than she'd seen in months' contributions from across town, rich and poor alike. This is too much. It's not enough. Bull interrupted. Not for what you've done, but it's a start. He shifted uncomfortably. Lucy's been telling everyone how you stood between her and that raider during the fire, how you've been teaching her, giving her a chance. That matters to folks. After he left, Clarabelle sat staring at the money, overwhelmed. Rebecca found her there, tears streaming down her face. Now you're crying, Rebecca said. After everything else, this is what breaks you. They're trusting me, Clarabelle managed. With their money, their hope. What if I fail them? Then you fail fighting. Better than failing running. Rebecca sat beside her. The town council met again this morning, voted unanimously to support you, whatever that looks like. That night, Clarabelle couldn't sleep. She walked to her window, looked out at Dead River, this harsh, complicated place that had somehow become home. Tomorrow was the third day. Time to decide. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Sheriff Watts, looking older than usual. Sheriff, can I come in? This ain't an official visit. She let him enter, watched him fidget with his hat. Eugene Watts don't apologize often. He began, but I owe you one. When you first arrived, I saw trouble. Wanted you gone. You made that clear. Yeah, well, I was wrong. He met her eyes. You've done more for this town in months than I have in years. Saved lives, brought folks together. If that federal marshal wants you, he'll have to explain to the whole town why. You're willing to stand against federal authority. I'm willing to ensure due process, to demand that any hearing be fair, that your work here be considered. He stood to leave, then paused. My sister died of fever 5 years ago. No one here knew how to help her. Might have been different if someone like you had been around then. After he left, Clarabelle made her decision. She would stay. She would face whatever came, not as Clarabelle Finch the fugitive, but as Clarabelle Finch of Dead River healer, council member, teacher, the woman she'd become, not the one she'd been. She spent the rest of the night writing letters, one to the lawyer Morgan had recommended, one to the federal marshal who was coming, and one to Lucy in case the worst happened. As dawn broke, she dressed carefully in her best dress, pinned her hair severely, and went to open the shop as usual. Lucy arrived early, took one look at her, and smiled. You're staying? I'm staying. Then we'd better get to work. Mrs. Patterson's arthritis is acting up, and the Johnson baby has croup again. They worked side by side, treating patients, mixing medicines, carrying on as if federal marshals and old accusations were just another challenge to face. And perhaps they were. Clarabelle had survived worse. She'd survived loss, false accusations, bounty hunters, and a town's initial rejection. She'd survived by becoming necessary, by serving others, by refusing to be only what her past dictated. Morgan appeared at closing time, slipping in as the last patient left. Heard you made your choice. Was there really any other? There's always another choice. That's what makes the one you pick matter. He pulled out another paper. Marshall's name is Frank Garrison. Good man, fair. He'll listen if you give him reason to. You know him. We've crossed paths. He could have shot me once, chose to let me help him save a kidnapped child instead. Man like that understands that law and justice aren't always the same thing. Will you be here when he arrives? Better if I'm not. My presence would complicate things. He moved toward the door. But I'll be watching. If things go bad... They won't, Clarabelle interrupted. I have to believe that. He nodded slowly. Then I'll believe it too. At the door, he turned back. You've changed this town. Clarabelle Finch. More than you know. Whatever happens next, remember that. Then he was gone, leaving Clarabelle to lock up and prepare for whatever came next. The federal marshal would arrive soon. The town would stand with her, and she would face her past with the strength of the present she'd built. One patient at a time. One kindness at a time. One stitch in the fabric of a community that had decided she was worth fighting for. Marshal Frank Garrison arrived on a Thursday, alone and without fanfare. He was a tall man in his 40s, weathered but not hard, with intelligent gray eyes that took in everything. He rode straight to the sheriff's office, where half the town had already gathered. Clarabelle watched from the shop window as he dismounted, noted the way he moved careful but not threatening, a man doing a job rather than hunting prey. Lucy stood beside her, gripping her hand too tightly. "He doesn't look cruel," the girl whispered. "The fair ones are sometimes harder to fight," Clarabelle replied. "Cruel men make mistakes. Fair men follow procedure." Within an hour, Sheriff Watts arrived at the shop. "Marshal wants to see you. Says he'd prefer to do this civil-like, in my office, rather than making a scene." Clarabelle had prepared for this moment, but her hands still trembled as she removed her apron. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." "I'll walk with you," Rebecca said, appearing from the back room where she'd been waiting. "And me," Lucy added. "We all will," Emma Muller said from the doorway, her eldest son Hans beside her. And so Clarabelle walked to the sheriff's office surrounded by a growing crowd patients she'd treated, women she'd taught, men whose families she'd saved. By the time they reached the building, most of Main Street had joined the procession. Marshal Garrison stood on the porch, watching the crowd with raised eyebrows. "Mrs. Finch, I presume." "Marshal." She stepped forward, head high. "I understand you have a warrant." "I do, but I'd prefer to discuss this inside. If you're willing, just you, me, and Sheriff Watts." He glanced at the crowd. "These folks can wait out here if they're concerned for your welfare." "She goes nowhere alone," Rebecca stated flatly. Garrison's lips twitched slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not here to harm Mrs. Finch, just to execute a lawful warrant. The lady will be perfectly safe." "It's all right," Clarabelle told her friends. "I'll speak with him." Inside, Garrison laid the warrant on Watts's desk. "It's all legal and proper. Mrs. Finch, signed by Judge Cartwright in Kansas. Charges are conspiracy to commit theft and murder in the second degree." "I was acquitted of the theft charges," Clarabelle said calmly. "By a local court. This is federal jurisdiction now, based on the interstate nature of the crime and the death involved." He studied her. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. Ma'am, seen all kinds. You don't strike me as the criminal type." "Yet here you are." "Here I am." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me your side. I've got time to listen." So Clarabelle told him everything: her husband's failing practice, his desperate decision to treat outlaws for money, her growing suspicions and ultimate discovery of his involvement with horse thieves, how she'd been preparing to leave him when the vigilantes struck, killing everyone at the ranch, including Thomas Henderson and her husband. "I wasn't there," she finished. "I was at home, packing to leave. I learned of his death when they brought his body back." "Can anyone verify that?" "In Kansas, no. My husband was secretive about his activities. I had no friends there. He'd isolated us from society as his practice failed." Garrison made notes. "And the murder charge?" "They claim I knew about the planned raid, that I sent my husband there knowing violence would occur. It's not true. I discovered his involvement only days before, and I certainly didn't know the vigilantes were planning an attack." "Henderson claims otherwise, says you were the mastermind, that you used your husband's medical access to coordinate with the thieves. Henderson wants someone to blame for his brother's death. I'm convenient, a woman alone, already tainted by association." She met Garrison's eyes directly. "I won't claim innocence of all knowledge. I suspected my husband was treating unsavory people, but I never participated in nor planned any crimes." Garrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Watts. "Sheriff, what's your opinion of Mrs. Finch?" Watts shifted uncomfortably. "Few months ago, I'd have said she was trouble. Wanted her gone." He glanced at Clarabelle. But she's proven herself. Saved half the children in town during the fever outbreak. Works tirelessly for anyone who needs help. During the fire and raid, she risked her life tending wounded. I see. Garrison stood, walked to the window where the crowd still waited. Seems you've made quite an impression on Dead River. Mrs. Finch. I've tried to build a life here, to be useful. The lawyer in Tucson has already contacted me, Garrison said, surprising her. Mr. Nathaniel Cross says he's been retained to represent you. Also says he has depositions from several citizens here attesting to your character and contributions to the community. Morgan's doing, Clarabelle realized. The lawyer had worked fast.
Marshal,
she said carefully.
What happens now?
By law, I should arrest you and transport you back to Kansas for trial. He turned from the window. However, I have some discretion in how that happens. Given the community support and your established life here, I'm willing to consider alternatives, such as house arrest here in Dead River while we await a hearing. Mr. Cross is petitioning for a change of venue, arguing you can't get a fair trial in Kansas given Henderson's influence. If a federal judge agrees, the trial could be held in the territorial capital instead. You'd trust me not to run. Would you run? Clarabelle thought of her cabin refuge, of Morgan's offer to help her disappear. No, I'm done running. Then I'll trust you. He gathered his papers. You'll be confined to the town limits. Daily check-ins with Sheriff Watts. Any violation, and I'll have no choice but to jail you immediately. That's more than fair. Maybe, but I've learned to read people in this job. You're either innocent or the best actress I've ever met. He put on his hat. I'll be staying in town until this is resolved. Try not to make me regret this decision. When they emerged from the office, the crowd pressed forward anxiously. Clarabelle quickly explained the arrangement, watching relief wash over familiar faces.
So you're staying?
Lucy asked, hope bright in her eyes. For now, there will still be a trial, but you'll face it here, with us beside you. Rebecca interrupted firmly. That's what matters. The crowd dispersed slowly. People stopping to press Clarabelle's hand or offer support. Marshal Garrison watched it all with thoughtful eyes before heading to the boarding house. That evening, Nathaniel Cross arrived, a thin, energetic man with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. He met with Clarabelle at the shop, spreading papers across her work table. Morgan Holt was quite insistent I take your case, he said without preamble. Paid in gold, too. Don't often see that. You know who he is. Everyone in the territory knows who Morgan Holt is. What's interesting is him taking such interest in a legal matter. Cross adjusted his spectacles. But that's neither here nor there. We have work to do. They spent hours going over every detail of her story, Cross taking copious notes. He'd already gathered statements from 20 Dead River citizens and had plans to depose more. The key, he explained, is establishing your husband acted alone, that you were a victim of his choices rather than a conspirator. The work you've done here helps shows character inconsistent with the accusations. Will it be enough? Honestly, I don't know. Henderson has deep pockets and deeper grudges. But we have advantages too. Marshal Garrison's report will carry weight. He's respected for fairness. And if we can get the venue changed, he smiled thinly. Let's just say Henderson's influence doesn't reach as far as he thinks. Days passed in strange normalcy. Clarabelle continued her work, treating patients and teaching Lucy, while Garrison watched from a respectful distance. He even brought his horse to her once, seeking treatment for a minor injury, and she sensed he was still evaluating her. You could have run, he said as she dressed the wound. When you first got my letter, why didn't you? Where would I go? She secured the bandage carefully. I've been Clarabelle Finch the fugitive for too long. I wanted to try being Clarabelle Finch the healer, the teacher, the citizen of Dead River. Even if it means prison. Even then, though I hope it doesn't come to that, One evening, a week into her house arrest, she found Morgan waiting in the shadows behind the church. She'd wondered if he'd stay away until the marshal left, but she should have known better. "You're taking a risk," she said. "Always am." He studied her in the dim light. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected. The marshal is fair, more than fair. Frank Garrison's a good man, one of the few lawmen I respect." He paused. "If this goes badly, it won't. But if it does, then I'll face the consequences." She moved closer, could see the concern in his eyes above the bandana. "I meant what I said. I'm done running. Whatever happens, I'll see it through." "Stubborn woman." "Pot calling the kettle black." He laughed softly. "A rare sound." "Perhaps, but my stubbornness only risks myself. Yours risks disappointing all those people who've come to depend on you. They're stronger than you think. I've taught Lucy everything I know. Rebecca could run the medical supplies. The town would survive. Surviving isn't the same as thriving." He reached out, touched her shoulder briefly. "Don't give up yet. Cross is good at what he does, and Garrison's report will help. Have faith. In the law, the same law that's protected Henderson all this time. No, in the truth, in the people who know you, in the life you've built here." He stepped back into deeper shadows. "I'll be watching the trial. If I see things turning bad, you'll do nothing," she said firmly. "Promise me, no interference. I won't have you risking yourself for my mistakes." "Your husband's mistakes?" "My choice to marry him? My blindness to his desperation." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "Promise me, Morgan." He was silent for a long moment. "I promise not to interfere with the legal proceedings. But Clarabelle, if they try to take you back to Kansas, if Henderson tries something outside the law, then that's different." She managed a small smile. "Thank you for everything. The lawyer, the support, the friendship." Friendship. He seemed to taste the word. "Is that what this is?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither was ready to explore. Finally, Morgan touched his hat brim and melted back into the night, leaving Clarabelle to walk slowly back to the boarding house. 3 weeks later, word came. The federal judge had agreed to the change of venue. The trial would be held in Prescott, the territorial capital, in 1 month's time. Cross was jubilant, Garrison grimly satisfied, and the town erupted in celebration. "It's not a victory yet," Clarabelle cautioned Lucy as they worked. "Just a chance at a fair hearing." "It's more than that," Lucy insisted. "It's proof that truth matters, that people like us can stand up to people like Henderson." That night, Clarabelle stood at her window looking out at Dead River, this unlikely home, this harsh haven that had given her purpose when she'd had none. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, preparations for a trial that would decide her future. But tonight, she was still Clarabelle Finch of Dead River, healer and teacher, friend and neighbor. The stars above were bright and cold, indifferent to human struggles, but the lights in the windows below were warm, and behind many of them were people who would stand with her, who had already stood with her against bounty hunters and doubts and the weight of the past. The night before leaving for Prescott, Clarabelle couldn't sleep. She moved through her small room at the boarding house, touching familiar objects, the medical books that had been her husband's, the sewing kit her mother had given her, the dried herbs hanging in bunches by the window. Each item anchored her to the life she'd built, the life she might lose. A soft knock interrupted her restless pacing. She opened the door to find Lucy, pale and trembling. "I can't let you go alone," the girl said. "What if they don't let you come back? What if—" "Hush," Clarabelle drew her inside. "Marshal Garrison will ensure I arrive safely. Mr. Cross will argue my case, and you need to stay here. Keep the shop running. Tend the patients." "I don't care about the shop." "I do." Clarabelle gripped the girl's shoulders gently. "This work matters Lucy, the people here depend on us. If I don't return, they'll need you even more." They sat together on the narrow bed, Lucy crying quietly while Clarabelle stroked her hair. Outside, Dead River slept fitfully, unaware that come morning, part of its heart would be carved away. "Tell me about him," Lucy said suddenly. "Your husband, what was he like before everything went wrong?" Clarabelle closed her eyes, summoning memories she'd tried to bury. "He was brilliant, gentle. When we met, he had such dreams of healing, of making a difference. He'd spend hours studying, discovering new treatments. His patients loved him." "What changed?" "The world, I suppose, or maybe he did. His practice struggled people couldn't pay, or chose the cheaper doctor in the next town. He grew bitter, angry, started drinking. Then came the debts, and the wrong kind of patients offering good money for discreet treatment." "You loved him." "Once, maybe I loved who he could have been more than who he was." Clarabelle sighed. "That's my real crime. Lucy, I saw the signs and stayed too long, hoping he'd remember the man he used to be." They talked until dawn, when Rebecca arrived with Emma Mueller and several other women. They'd prepared food for the journey, practical supplies, and a leather journal. "For the trial," Rebecca explained. "Write everything down. Every detail you remember. Cross says it might help." Marshal Garrison arrived precisely at 7, driving a prison wagon that made Clarabelle's stomach clench, but he'd modified it, removed the bars, added cushions, tried to make it less like a cage. Sheriff Watts would accompany them, along with 2 deputies. "Ready, Mrs. Finch?" Garrison asked. She looked back at the crowd gathering despite the early hour. Her patients, her students, her friends, people who'd accepted her not despite her past but because of who she'd proven herself to be. "I'm ready." The journey took 3 days through rough country. Garrison proved surprisingly good company, sharing stories of his years as a marshal, asking about her medical knowledge. He seemed genuinely interested when she explained treatments for trail injuries, even took notes. "My wife would have liked you," he said on the second evening, as they camped under star-scattered sky. "She was a midwife, helped folks same as you do. Lost her to pneumonia 5 winters back." "I'm sorry." "So am I. But she'd approve of what I'm doing here, giving you a fair chance. She always said the law should protect the innocent, not just punish the guilty." On the 3rd morning, Prescott appeared larger than Dead River, with proper brick buildings and paved streets. The courthouse stood 3 stories tall, imposing with its columns and bronze dome. Clarabelle's courage faltered at the sight. "Steady," Garrison murmured. "It's just a building. Men inside are no different from those in Dead River, just wearing fancier clothes." Nathaniel Cross met them at the courthouse steps, vibrating with nervous energy. "Good. You're here. Henderson arrived yesterday with 3 lawyers. They're pushing for an immediate trial, but I've got us 2 days to prepare." The next hours blurred together meetings with Cross, reviewing testimony, preparing for questions. Clarabelle was housed in a clean cell in the courthouse itself, not the jail. Another small kindness from Garrison, who seemed to bend rules without quite breaking them. That evening, Cross visited with troubling news. "Henderson's brought witnesses, people who claim to have seen you at planning meetings, heard you discussing the robberies."
"That's impossible. I never—"
"I know, they're clearly paid testimony, but we need to discredit them, and that's harder than it sounds." He shuffled papers anxiously. "I've telegrammed for our own witnesses from Dead River, but travel time." "They won't abandon me," Clarabelle said with more confidence than she felt. She was right. The next morning, a delegation from Dead River arrived. Rebecca, Emma, Mr. Carlson, Bull Morrison, even Mrs. Pike. They'd ridden through the night, taking turns sleeping in wagons, determined to stand for her. The trial began on a Thursday morning. Judge Samuel Brennan presiding, an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. The courtroom filled quickly. Henderson and his supporters on one side, Clarabelle's allies on the other. Henderson had aged badly in the months since she'd last seen him. Grief and anger had carved deep lines in his face, turned his eyes hard as flint. He stared at her with such hatred that she had to look away. The prosecutor, a smooth-talking man named Aldrich, painted a damning picture. Clarabelle as the manipulative wife, using her husband's skills for criminal enterprise. The paid witnesses were convincing, describing meetings that never happened with enough detail to sound plausible. Cross fought back admirably, pointing out inconsistencies, the lack of physical evidence, the convenient timing of these witnesses' memories. But Clarabelle could see doubt in some jurors' faces. Henderson's money had bought persuasive lies. Then came her turn to testify. She told her story simply, without embellishment, the slow realization of her husband's activities, her plans to leave, the shock of his death. Cross guided her through carefully, but the real test came with Aldrich's cross-examination. You claim ignorance of your husband's activities, Mrs. Finch, yet you lived in the same house, shared his life. How could you not know? Have you been married, Mr. Aldrich? She asked quietly. That's not relevant. It is. Marriage doesn't grant omniscience. My husband kept secrets, as many spouses do. I suspected something was wrong. Yes, but suspicion isn't knowledge, and concern isn't conspiracy. Yet you did nothing. I was preparing to leave, to seek a divorce. I'd spoken to a lawyer the week before his death. She met his gaze steadily. If I was truly part of his schemes, why would I abandon them just as they were succeeding? The questioning continued for hours, Aldrich trying to trap her in contradictions while she held to the truth. When it finally ended, she was exhausted, but unbroken. The next day brought character witnesses, one by one. Citizens of Dead River testified to her nature, her work, her value to their community. Emma Mueller wept describing how Clarabelle had saved Hans. Bull Morrison, uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, gruffly attested to her kindness toward Lucy and the other vulnerable women. Most powerful was Rebecca's testimony. I lost my husband to violence, she said, voice steady despite emotion. I know what grief looks like, what guilt looks like. I see neither in Clarabelle Finch. What I see is a woman who took her second chance and used it to serve others. If that's not evidence of character, I don't know what is. Henderson's lawyers tried to dismiss it all as frontier sentiment, but Clarabelle could see the jury listening, weighing the paid witnesses against the unpaid ones who'd traveled so far. On the third day, an unexpected witness arrived. Clarabelle didn't recognize the elderly man who took the stand, but Cross seemed pleased. State your name for the record, Judge Brennan instructed. A doctor, Elias Hartwell. I ran a medical practice in Kansas until my retirement last year. Clarabelle's breath caught. She remembered now her husband had spoken of him with professional jealousy. Dr. Hartwell, Cross began. Were you acquainted with the deceased? Dr. William Finch. He approached me 2 years ago, seeking a position in my practice. I declined. Why? His reputation preceded him. Brilliant physician, but unstable. Drinking, gambling, mounting debts. I couldn't risk my practice's reputation. Hartwell glanced at Clarabelle with sympathy. I also met his wife at a medical society dinner. She seemed trapped, isolated. I remember thinking she deserved better. Did she seem involved in her husband's activities? Quite the opposite. She seemed desperate to maintain respectability, to pretend everything was normal. When I heard about his involvement with criminals, I wasn't surprised. When I heard she was being blamed, I was appalled. Henderson's lawyers tried to shake Hartwell's testimony, but he held firm. And respected doctor's word carried weight the paid witnesses couldn't match. Closing arguments came on the fourth day. Aldrich painted her as Lady Macbeth, the power behind her husband's throne of crime. Cross countered with the image of a woman trapped by circumstances, who'd chosen to rebuild rather than revenge. The prosecution asks you to believe Clarabelle Finch is a master criminal, Cross concluded. Yet, where is the evidence? No money traced to her, no documents in her hand. Only the words of men who appeared conveniently when Mr. Henderson's gold did against that. You have the testimony of an entire town who've seen her true character, who've watched her heal, teach, and serve without thought of gain. The choice is clear. The jury retired. Clarabelle was returned to her cell to wait, but she wasn't alone. Her friends from Dead River took turns sitting with her, bringing food, offering comfort. Even Marshal Garrison stopped by. "Whatever happens," he said, "you've conducted yourself with dignity. That matters." Hours passed. Then, as afternoon shadows lengthened, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed as Clarabelle stood to hear her fate. She kept her eyes fixed on Judge Brennan, afraid to look at the jury, at Henderson, at her friends. On the charge of conspiracy to commit theft, the foreman read, "We find the defendant not guilty." Clarabelle's knees weakened. Rebecca's hand found hers, gripped tight. "On the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Henderson shot to his feet, shouting about corruption, about bought justice, before his lawyers hustled him out. Clarabelle's supporters surged forward, embracing her, crying with relief. "It's over," Cross said, grinning broadly. "You're free, truly free." Through the chaos, Clarabelle caught sight of a familiar figure in black at the back of the courtroom. Morgan touched his hat brim, that ghost of a smile visible in his eyes, before disappearing into the crowd. That evening, as her friends celebrated in a Prescott hotel, Clarabelle stepped onto the balcony for air. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. She thought about paths not taken, choices that led here, to this moment of vindication and freedom. "You did well," Morgan's voice came from the shadows. "Of course he'd find her. I told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing." He joined her at the railing, keeping distance between them as always. "What now?" "Back to Dead River. Back to work. Lucy's probably got a dozen patients backed up." She smiled. "Back to living without looking over my shoulder. That's all." She turned to study him, this mysterious man who'd protected her, supported her, asked nothing in return. What else would there be? "That's for you to decide." He straightened. "I'll be moving on for a while. Business elsewhere, but I'll be back." "Will you?" "Dead River's special to me now." His eyes met hers above the bandana. "Worth protecting. Worth returning to." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the lingering sense of possibility, of futures not yet written. The next morning, Clarabelle began the journey home with her friends, truly free for the first time in over a year. Henderson's shadow no longer stretched across her path. The past was settled. Only the future remained. As their wagon rolled through the desert, Lucy chattering excitedly about all that had happened in her absence, Clarabelle allowed herself to dream, not of escape or survival, but of building, growing, becoming more than circumstances had allowed. The trial was over, but her real life, the one she'd chosen, fought for, earned, was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the trial. Dead River had settled into autumn routines, the desert heat finally breaking into cooler days. Clarabelle had never been busier. Her practice expanded beyond the shop to include regular visits to outlying ranches, teaching sessions for midwives, and even consultations with doctors from neighboring towns who'd heard of her work during the epidemic. This particular morning brought rain, unusual for the season. Clarabelle stood at her window watching drops trace patterns on the glass, thinking of all that had changed. Lucy now handled minor cases independently, her confidence growing daily. The shop had expanded into the adjacent building, creating space for a proper examination room and larger medicine storage. "You're wool gathering again," Rebecca said from the doorway. She'd taken to helping with the shop's business matters, her practical nature perfect for managing supplies and accounts. "Just thinking." Clarabelle turned from the window.
Morgan's been gone longer than usual. 3 months isn't so long for a man like him.
Rebecca's tone was carefully neutral.
You missing him?
"The town misses him. His protection, his presence."
That's not what I asked.
Before Clarabelle could answer, commotion erupted in the street. Through the rain, she saw riders approaching a dozen men, moving fast. Her hand went automatically to where she used to keep her pistol, though she no longer carried it. "Trouble!" Lucy appeared from the back room, alert as always to danger. But as the riders drew closer, Clarabelle recognized the lead figure, Morgan, rain-soaked and dust-covered, his black coat darker with moisture. Behind him rode unfamiliar men, and in their midst—
Is that a wagon?
Rebecca squinted through the rain.
What's he brought back?
They got their answers soon enough. Morgan dismounted outside the shop, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely excited above his bandana. "I need your help," he said without preamble. "Got wounded men. Fight with claim jumpers about 50 miles north." Clarabelle was already moving, calling for Lucy to prepare the examination room. The wounded were brought in 2 men with gunshot wounds, another with a broken arm. "As she worked," Morgan explained. "Found these folks trying to defend their mining claim against Henderson's old gang. Seems he left some debts and grudges behind, and these vultures thought to collect from anyone vulnerable." "Henderson's men," Clarabelle paused in cleaning a wound. "But he's broken, last I heard. Lost most of his money on the trial and bad investments. But his hired guns went into business for themselves." Morgan watched her work with those pale eyes.
They won't be troubling anyone anymore.
She didn't ask what that meant. Some things were better left unspecified. Instead, she focused on healing, with Lucy assisting capably. The miners would recover, though it would take time. As evening fell and the patients rested, Morgan lingered. The other men had found lodging at the boarding house, but he remained in the shop, unusually hesitant. "There's something else," he finally said. "Something I need to tell you." Clarabelle dried her hands slowly, sensing the weight of what was coming. "I'm listening." "The claim jumpers weren't random. They knew I'd been helping folks around here, knew about Dead River, about you." He moved to the window, gazed out at the rain-washed street.
My past is catching up. Clarabelle, the things I've done, the enemies I've made, they're starting to circle.
"Then we'll face them. The town stands together now. You taught us that." "No." His voice was firm. "I won't bring that kind of trouble here. Won't risk—" He stopped, shoulders tense.
Won't risk what?
He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before.
Vulnerability.
This place, everything I've come to—" Again he stopped, as if words were foreign territory. Clarabelle stepped closer, close enough to see the raindrops still clinging to his coat. "Morgan, what are you trying to say?"
I'm saying I need to leave. For good this time. Draw trouble away from Dead River.
His hand rose slightly, as if to touch her, then fell.
But I couldn't go without telling you the truth.
"What truth?" In answer, he reached up and slowly pulled down the bandana that had hidden half his face for as long as she'd known him. Clarabelle's breath caught. Not because of any disfigurement, his face was weathered but whole, with a strong jaw and surprisingly gentle mouth. It was the trust in that gesture, the vulnerability of revealing himself. "My name really is Morgan Holt," he said quietly. "I really am the outlaw, they say, but somewhere between that first night at the boarding house and now, I became something else too. A man who wanted to stop running, stop hiding. A man who found something worth protecting more than his own life. Morgan." Let me finish. His voice was rough with emotion. I've done things. Clarabelle. Robbed those who robbed others. Yes, but violence follows that path. Men have died by my hand. I chose that life, and I don't regret the choices that led me to help folks who couldn't help themselves, but I regret that it means I can't offer you anything clean, anything worthy of what you've built here. Clarabelle reached up, touched his revealed face gently. He flinched as if burned, but didn't pull away. You saved me, she said simply, not just from bounty hunters or false charges. You saved me from becoming bitter, from giving up. You showed me how to fight for a place to belong. You'd have found that yourself. Maybe, but I found it with you watching from the shadows, keeping faith when I couldn't. Her hand moved to rest over his heart, feeling it race beneath layers of cloth and leather. Don't run, Morgan, not this time. They'll come for me. Eventually, they always do. Then we'll be ready. Together. She smiled, thinking of all the impossible things that had become possible in this harsh place. Dead River protects its own. Remember? He caught her hand, held it pressed against his chest. I can't promise anything, can't promise safety or permanence or even survival. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking you to stay, to stop running long enough to see what we might build together. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tableau healer and outlaw, past and future balanced on the edge of choice. Then Morgan bent his head and kissed her, gentle as rain after drought. When they parted, his eyes held something that looked like hope. All right, he said. I'll stay. For now. See what comes. That's all any of us can do. A cough from the doorway made them spring apart. Lucy stood there, trying unsuccessfully to hide a grin. Sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Patterson's here about her rheumatism medicine. As Clarabelle moved to attend her patient, Morgan caught her hand briefly. Tonight, he said, we should talk, make plans. If I'm staying, things need to change. After dinner, the cabin on the ridge, I still have the key. He nodded, pulled the bandana back up out of habit, then stopped and lowered it again. Another small surrender to possibility. The rest of the day passed in a blur of patience and preparations. Word spread quickly that Morgan Holt was back, that he'd fought off claim jumpers, that something had shifted. Clarabelle caught speculative looks from Rebecca, knowing smiles from some of the women who'd noticed what she'd tried to hide, that her heart raced when hoofbeats might be his, that she watched shadows hoping for a familiar silhouette. As evening painted the sky purple and gold, Clarabelle saddled the mare Morgan had given her so long ago. Lucy would handle any emergencies. Rebecca would deflect questions. This night was for decisions that couldn't be made in public view. She found him already at the cabin. Fire built, coffee brewing. He'd shaved, she noticed, revealing more of the face he'd hidden so long. It made him look younger, more vulnerable, though his eyes remained watchful as ever. Regrets already? She asked, settling beside him on the rough bench outside. No, just adjusting. He poured coffee, handed her a cup. Been hiding so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. The town will adjust too. They know you as the mysterious protector. Learning you're also a man might take time. And you, he studied her over his cup. What are you adjusting to? The idea that I might get to keep something good. That happiness doesn't always come with a price tag of loss. She leaned against his shoulder, felt him relax by degrees. I spent so long running from my past, I forgot to imagine a future. What do you imagine now? Work I love, people who matter, maybe expanding the clinic, bringing in a proper doctor to train with us. Lucy taking over more responsibilities. She paused. And you, not always in shadows, part of things, building instead of just protecting. That's a lot of imagination. You asked. They sat quietly as stars emerged, the desert cooling around them. Inside the cabin waited decisions about how to manage his presence publicly, how to deal with potential threats, how to balance his past with their possible future. But for now, this was enough. Two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, choosing to stop running long enough to see what staying might bring. "You know," Morgan said eventually, "that first night I saw you at Pike's boarding house, proud and scared and refusing to back down, I thought you were magnificent. Still do."
"And I thought you were terrifying."
"Still think that."
"Sometimes. But Morgan," she turned to face him, "I'm more terrified of you leaving than staying. Whatever comes, we're stronger together."
He set down his cup, drew her close. "Then we face it together. No more running alone."
"No more sleeping alone either,"
she said, echoing his words from so long ago. In the cabin, they talked through the night, practical plans mixed with kisses, strategy interrupted by admissions of feeling too long denied. By dawn, they'd mapped out a future neither could have imagined months before. Morgan would slowly integrate into town life, using his skills to train a civilian defense force. His knowledge of the territory's dangers would help protect the growing community. Some would always fear him, but respect might bridge that gap. As the sun rose, they stood in the cabin doorway, looking out at the valley that led to Dead River. Their town, their home. "Ready?" Morgan asked. "For scandal, gossip, watching misses. Pike faint when she realizes you're courting me officially." "All of it." Clarabelle laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Then yes, I'm ready." They rode back together in the morning light, no longer hiding, no longer alone. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as always in this unforgiving land. But they would meet it as they'd learned to meet all challenges, with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that some things were worth standing and fighting for. The cabin door closed behind them, but it would open again. Like their hearts, like their lives, like the promise of what two broken people might build together in a place where the river ran dry, but hope flowed eternal. Dead River had one more legend now of the healer and the outlaw who chose each other and chose to stay, proving that redemption came in many forms and love could bloom even in the harshest soil. And if sometimes shadows still moved at the edge of town, if sometimes danger still circled, well, that's what made their choice to stand together all the more precious. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose to stop running. Choose to trust. Choose to build something worth protecting. One day, one kindness, one brave moment at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Clarabelle and Morgan's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage and redemption from the American frontier. Until next time, keep riding toward your own sunset, partners.